The wind rolled across the high plains like a living thing, bending the grass in waves and carrying with it the quiet judgments of a small frontier town that had never learned how to look past appearances. And in the middle of that wind stood Mara Hale, the young widow everyone whispered about, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she was too much of everything they were afraid of. Too tall, too strong, too different. A woman built like the mountains themselves, with hands that could lift a saddle alone and eyes that carried grief deep, enough to drown a man who stared too long. And ever since her husband died under a collapsing beam at the sawmill, people looked at her as if her size alone had caused the tragedy, as if fate had made her large so it could punish her harder. Mara lived on the edge of town in a half-finished cabin she had built herself, every plank nailed with stubborn resolve, every night spent listening to the coyotes and the echo of loneliness pressing against her ribs, until the day she was forced to ride into the valley ranch to answer a notice she didn't understand. Something about land boundaries, about debts that weren't hers, about a meeting with the richest rancher in 3 counties, Silas Crow, a man rumored to be cold as iron and twice as hard. And when Mara arrived, towering over the hitching post, people stared like always, but Silas didn't. He looked once, measured her not by her height, but by the way she held her shoulders as if carrying the sky. And in his quiet office, with sunlight cutting dust into gold, he spoke low and steady when he saw her hands shaking as she tried to sit on a chair, clearly made for smaller lives. And with a voice that surprised even himself, he leaned closer and whispered, "Too big. Just sit on it." Not as an insult, not as a command, but as a gentle permission to stop apologizing for existing. And in that moment something in Mara cracked open, because no one had ever told her she didn't need to shrink. What followed was not a simple meeting, but the beginning of a slow burning reckoning as Silas revealed the truth, that her late husband had unknowingly built on disputed land, that powerful men wanted her gone, and that Silas, who had lost a wife to illness years before and buried his heart along with her, saw in Mara a mirror of his own isolation. Days turned into weeks as legal battles brewed and townsfolk whispered louder. But Mara kept coming back to the ranch, learning the business, discovering she had a mind as strong as her body, standing up in rooms where men scoffed until she spoke facts sharper than knives. And each night she returned to her cabin stronger, straighter, until one evening, a storm tore through the plains, and she found herself stranded at Silas's ranch, lightning splitting the sky as they sat by, the fire sharing the kind of silence that only 2 broken people can share without fear. And as the flames danced, Silas told her something no one else knew, that he had almost sold the ranch after his wife died. Believing some losses made a man smaller forever, and Mara, staring into the fire, realized her terror wasn't of her size at all, but of being seen, truly seen and rejected anyway. Yet in that room she felt something unfamiliar, safety. And as the storm passed and dawn crept in, Mara understood that her life was no longer just about surviving grief, but about choosing whether she would finally take up the space she was born to fill. If this story is already stirring something inside you, if you believe strength and tenderness can exist in the same heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because stories like this are meant to remind us that our differences are not curses, they are callings. By the time the court date arrived, the town was split down the middle like a cracked rail, half expecting the giant widow to be crushed by powerful interests and half secretly hoping she would win just to prove the world could still surprise them. And Mara walked into that courthouse with her back straight and her fear acknowledged but no longer obeyed. Silas at her side not as a savior but as a witness, because the real battle had already been fought inside her. And when lawyers tried to belittle her, when men smirked and measured her like livestock, Mara spoke with a voice steady as bedrock, explaining the work she had done, the land she had improved, the taxes she had paid, and the judge, an old man who had seen too many bullies dressed as respectable citizens, listened closely. And when the ruling came down in her favor, a hush fell, followed by a ripple of something dangerously close to hope. Victory didn't end the whispers overnight, but it changed their tone. And in the weeks that followed, Mara's cabin became a proper home, then a workshop, then a place people came to for help when fences broke or storms hit. And she never pretended to be small again. While Silas found his ranch slowly filling with life he hadn't realized he'd been starving for. Laughter in the corrals, shared meals, Long talks about rebuilding not just land but purpose. The bond between them grew not from grand gestures but from everyday courage, from choosing honesty over pride, from understanding that love isn't about fitting into someone else's world but building a bigger one together. And when Silas finally asked Mara to partner with him, not in ownership alone but in life, he did so plainly, without poetry, saying only that the world had tried to tell them both they were too much and too broken, and he was done believing it. Mara didn't answer right away, because choosing happiness after loss is its own kind of bravery. But when she did, she stepped forward without shrinking, without fear, knowing that whatever came next she would meet it standing tall. And as the seasons turned, the valley learned a quiet lesson. That strength wears many shapes, that healing doesn't ask permission, and that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is stop trying to make themselves smaller for the comfort of others. If this ending moved you, if you believe stories like this deserve to be told and heard, subscribe to the channel, share this story, and stay with us, because the next story might be the one that reminds you to take up your space in the world. The true ending of Mara Hale's story did not arrive in a single dramatic moment, but unfolded slowly, the way real healing always does, quietly, stubbornly, and against expectation, as the valley shifted around her, seasons turning like pages that no one could stop. Because after the court victory and the whispered congratulations faded, what remained was the harder work of living openly in a world that had once demanded she stay hidden, and Mara chose that work every morning she woke before dawn, pulling on boots that still bore scratches from a life of labor, stepping outside to feel the land under her feet, no longer as borrowed ground but as a promise she intended to keep. Her workshop grew into a cooperative space where widows, outcasts, and men who had failed elsewhere found honest work, and the town that once stared now depended on her strength without resenting it, though some never fully stopped fearing it, and Mara accepted that too, because she had learned a hard truth. Not everyone is meant to understand you, but that does not make your existence a question. Silas watched all this with a quiet pride that startled him, realizing love was not something that demanded ownership or rescue, but something that stood beside and said, "I see you choosing yourself." And when hardship struck again, as it always does, with drought threatening the herds and a fire racing the wind toward the north fields, it was Mara who organized the defense, her voice carrying over chaos, her body moving where others hesitated, proving not that she was unbreakable but that she was willing. And afterward, soot-streaked and exhausted, she finally allowed herself to lean into Silas's shoulder, not because she needed to be held up, but because she wanted to be held at all. They married quietly under an open sky, no lace meant to disguise her size, no vows asking either of them to be less than they were, only a promise spoken plainly, to build, to endure, to make room. And when Mara stood there, taller than nearly everyone present, she did not feel monstrous or misplaced. She felt right, like a woman finally aligned with her own spine. Years later, children would run across those fields without fear, hearing stories of the giant widow who taught a valley how to grow kinder, and Mara would smile at the irony, knowing she had never been too big for the world at all. The world had simply been too small until it learned to expand. And as this story closes, remember this: your pain does not disqualify you from joy. Your differences do not make you unlovable. And your size, whether of body, heart, or dreams, is not something to apologize for. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of your own quiet strength, subscribe to the channel. Stay with us and keep choosing stories that help you stand tall, because the world changes every time someone stops trying to make themselves smaller.